The ballroom was buzzing with laughter and clinking glasses. It was the kind of celebration that promised joy and unity. Yet, beneath the bright chandeliers and the sea of smiling faces, an invisible storm brewed. "He's just a waiter," Michael sneered loudly, leaning close to his friends at the wedding banquet. His voice carried easily across the room. "Nothing more." The guests chuckled, nodding in agreement, their eyes flickering toward the man quietly moving between tables, balancing plates with practiced ease. Thomas Brooks caught the words without turning around. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a glass of wine before a guest. The sting wasn't in the insult itself, he had heard it before, but in the cold certainty with which it was said by his own son-in-law. He paused for a moment, eyes flicking toward his daughter Laura's radiant smile, oblivious to the humiliation unfolding just steps away. For a brief second, Thomas's gaze met hers, searching for a flicker of solidarity, but found only a polite smile. He swallowed the lump in his throat and continued his work silently, every movement mechanical yet precise. The laughter grew louder, and Michael raised his glass in a mocking toast. "To the waiter, may he always stay exactly where he belongs." No one spoke up. The room buzzed, but an invisible wall had formed around Thomas, isolating him in plain sight. After the wedding banquet ended and the guests had drifted away, the ballroom lights dimmed, leaving behind only echoes of laughter and faint clinks of glasses. Thomas stood alone near the empty buffet table, wiping down crumbs with slow, steady motions. The weight of the night pressed heavily on his chest, but not a single word of complaint escaped his lips. His thoughts drifted to Laura, his daughter, the bright light of his otherwise shadowed life. 4 years, she had been his pride and hope, the reason he kept pushing forward despite the relentless hardships. But lately, that light had grown dim, eclipsed by the cold walls of distance and indifference. Laura and Michael's marriage was a world apart from the one Thomas had envisioned. She had married into privilege, into a lifestyle he never belonged to, never understood. And Michael had never hidden his disdain. To him, Thomas was nothing more than an obstacle, a reminder of a past better forgotten. The next morning, Thomas woke up in his small apartment on the outskirts of the city. The peeling wallpaper and creaky floors told stories of years lived quietly, far from the bustling streets and bright lights. This was his sanctuary, the place he returned to after every long shift. A place where he could finally be himself, alone. He brewed a simple cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the world go by. Across the street, a luxury sedan pulled up in front of a sleek townhouse, Laura and Michael's home. The sight sent a pang through Thomas's heart, mingling with bitterness and regret. Memories flooded in, vivid and painful. When Laura was a child, she used to run into his arms without hesitation, her laughter filling their modest home. Thomas had worked multiple jobs to make ends meet, always dreaming of giving her a better life. He'd sacrificed his own dreams for hers, putting aside his passion for painting and art to support her education, her happiness. But somewhere along the way, something broke. The phone calls became infrequent, the visits rarer. His presence in her life diminished to brief, awkward exchanges, overshadowed by the flashy new world she embraced. Thomas rubbed his temples, trying to push the memories aside, but the ache remained. The phone rang, jolting him back to reality. It was Laura. "Dad," she said, voice clipped but not unkind, "I wanted to thank you for everything at the wedding. The guests really appreciated your service." Thomas's lips twitched in a faint smile. "I'm glad to hear that, Laura." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken words. I'm busy with work and Michael's family stuff. Maybe we can catch up sometime next week." Her tone was polite, distant. "Sure," Thomas said softly. "Take care." He hung up and stared at the phone long after the call ended. The distance wasn't just physical, it was a chasm carved by years of unspoken resentment and shattered expectations. That day at work was no easier. Thomas moved through the restaurant, serving tables with a professionalism honed by decades, but his mind wandered to the banquet's cruel echo. Each sneer from Michael replayed in his head, fueling a quiet fire. But beneath the surface, Thomas wasn't just the waiter they thought he was. He was a man who had once dreamed of greatness, an artist with a gift, stifled by life's relentless demands. That night, after his shift, Thomas sat at a worn-out desk cluttered with old sketchbooks and faded paints. He picked up a pencil, and for the first time in years, began to draw. Lines flowed, shapes took form. The passion long buried stirred anew. This was the man beneath the apron and the tray. A man ready to prove the world, and his family, that he was so much more. For years, Thomas Brooks had buried his passion beneath layers of responsibility and quiet sacrifice. His life as a waiter was a necessity, a means to keep food on the table and a roof overhead. But deep inside, the artist never truly faded away. That hidden spark had survived the harsh winds of disappointment, loneliness, and neglect. That night, after a long day of serving others, Thomas sat at his small desk by the dim light of a flickering lamp. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened an old, dusty sketchbook, one he hadn't touched in over a decade. The pages were yellowed, covered with faint lines and shapes, unfinished dreams of colors and forms frozen in time. He took a deep breath, dipped his pencil into the worn eraser, and began to draw. With every stroke, he felt a weight lifting from his chest. The lines began to dance, bold, deliberate, filled with raw emotion. Faces emerged from the paper, expressions of pain, hope, regret, and defiance. The figure on the page bore a striking resemblance to someone Thomas knew all too well, himself. Hours slipped by unnoticed as Thomas lost himself in the world of shapes and shades, rediscovering a piece of his soul long forgotten. Yet, the life he led during the day was a stark contrast to this hidden world. The restaurant was his stage, and he was the invisible actor, moving through the motions while the real performance played out behind closed doors. Co-workers barely noticed him. Guests glanced past him without a second thought. He was just the waiter, the man who brought food and cleared tables. The scorn he endured at the wedding banquet was nothing new. Michael's dismissive words had cut deep, but they were a reminder of a truth Thomas refused to accept anymore: he deserved respect. The next morning, Thomas awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to believe that life might hold more than just survival. He decided to enter a local art competition, a small but significant step toward reclaiming his identity. Walking into the art supply store, Thomas felt like a stranger among younger, more confident artists. Yet, he did not falter. He purchased fresh sketchpads, pencils, and charcoal, tools of his rebirth. Back in his apartment, Thomas worked late into the night, perfecting a piece he planned to submit. The subject was a powerful portrait of a man broken by life but refusing to be defeated, a reflection of himself. Meanwhile, at Laura and Michael's home, life was a whirlwind of business meetings, social events, and carefully curated appearances. Laura scrolled through her phone, indifferent to the small world her father inhabited. The word waiter echoed in her mind, a label she had long accepted without question. Michael bragged about their social status, his voice dripping with arrogance. "He's just a waiter," Michael repeated, mocking, as if the word alone justified his contempt. Laura nodded, not daring to think otherwise. But fate, as it often does, was preparing to rewrite their story. Thomas's submission to the art competition caught the attention of the judges. His raw talent and emotional depth shone through his work, far beyond the expectations for a man of his station. A call came late one evening. "You've been selected as a finalist," the voice on the phone announced. "We'd like you to exhibit your work at the City Gallery next month." Thomas's hands shook, a mixture of disbelief and hope swirling within him. For years, he had been invisible. Now, suddenly, he was being seen. Word of the exhibition spread quietly, eventually reaching Laura and Michael. At first, they dismissed it as a small, local event, insignificant, beneath their notice. But as invitations arrived, their curiosity grew. Could it be true? Could the man they had mocked and ignored suddenly step into the spotlight? Thomas, meanwhile, prepared for the exhibition with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. There would be whispers, judgments, and perhaps more pain. But he was ready. For the first time in decades, Thomas was not just a waiter. He was an artist with a voice. one that refused to be silenced. The news of Thomas Brooks' success traveled slowly at first, like a ripple in a still pond. At Laura and Michael's upscale townhouse, the announcement arrived in the form of a glossy invitation to the City Gallery's upcoming exhibition. It was addressed simply, "Thomas Brooks, Finalist Exhibition." Michael tossed the invitation onto the marble countertop without a glance. "Look at this," he scoffed one evening, holding it up for Laura to see. "Your dad's suddenly an artist? After all these years of serving tables?" Laura folded her arms, biting back a sharp retort. Inside, a seed of uncertainty had begun to take root. She remembered the sneer at the wedding banquet and the whispered jokes among her friends. But now, a strange mix of pride and confusion settled over her. "You really think this changes anything?" Michael asked, not hiding his disdain. Laura hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe he's more than we thought." The words hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. Meanwhile, Thomas was immersed in preparations for the exhibition. He meticulously framed his paintings, rehearsed the stories behind each piece, and rehearsed a speech for the opening night. The anxiety of stepping out of the shadows battled against the thrill of being seen and valued. His apartment, once a quiet refuge, buzzed with a new energy. Old friends and neighbors began to reach out, congratulating him. For the first time in decades, Thomas felt the warmth of genuine support. Yet, beneath the surface, an undercurrent of doubt gnawed at him. What if Laura and Michael rejected him completely? What if his success only widened the gulf between them? The evening of the exhibition arrived. The gallery buzzed with art lovers, critics, and curious spectators. Thomas stood near his paintings, dressed in a simple but clean shirt and jacket, modest attire for a man unaccustomed to such attention. Spotlights illuminated his work, bold, raw, and unpolished, yet brimming with emotion. Faces in the crowd paused, moved by the story embedded in each brushstroke. Suddenly, through the gathering, Thomas caught sight of two familiar figures standing hesitantly near the entrance. Laura and Michael. They looked out of place among the patrons, their faces masks of uncertainty and surprise. Laura's eyes were fixed on her father's portrait, the one depicting a man weathered by life but standing proud. "This is Dad," she whispered. Michael nodded slowly, swallowing hard. As the night progressed, whispers started to circulate among the guests. The waiter turned artist. The man no one believed in. Thomas noticed the looks, both admiring and incredulous. For the first time, he was the center of attention, not as the man who served their meals, but as the man who created beauty from pain. Back at their home, the impact of the exhibition was palpable. Laura and Michael found themselves caught between their previous contempt and a growing respect they hadn't expected. They debated in hushed tones. "Maybe we were wrong about him," Laura said softly. "Maybe there's more to Dad than we gave him credit for." Michael was less sure. "It's hard to forget how he let us down all those years. But maybe this is his way of showing us who he really is," she replied. Thomas's journey was only beginning. The exhibition was a triumph, but it opened wounds long buried and challenged the fragile foundations of family ties. Would Laura and Michael be able to bridge the gap? Or would pride and past grievances push them further apart? Thomas knew the road ahead would be difficult. But with every brushstroke, he was reclaiming his dignity, and slowly, the respect of those who had doubted him. The days following the exhibition were heavy with unspoken words. Thomas returned to his quiet apartment, now transformed into a makeshift studio and gallery, filled with letters of praise and invitations to new shows. Yet, despite the growing recognition, his heart remained tethered to one place, the fractured family he longed to mend. Laura and Michael's initial surprise at the exhibition had quickly faded into something more complicated. At home, the facade of their perfect life was beginning to crack. Whispers between them grew more frequent, filled with frustration and regret. One evening, Laura confronted Michael in their sleek living room. "We can't just pretend this isn't happening," she said, voice trembling. "Dad's success, it's forcing us to face everything we've ignored." Michael paced, anger flickering in his eyes. He chose to leave us behind years ago. He let his dreams die instead of fighting for us. Now he shows up like some celebrity, expecting applause. Laura shook her head. It's not about applause. It's about truth. About the man we never really saw. Meanwhile, Thomas received a mysterious phone call. A voice on the other end, cautious yet familiar, urged him to revisit the past he had long tried to forget. There are things you don't know, Thomas. Things that might change everything. Curiosity mingled with apprehension. What secrets had been buried beneath the surface of his quiet life? Driven by a mix of hope and fear, Thomas agreed to meet the caller. The meeting took place in a small cafe, dimly lit and away from prying eyes. The man introduced himself as Jack, an old acquaintance from Thomas's youth, someone who had witnessed both his rise and fall. Jack slid an envelope across the table. These are letters and documents from back then. They show the real story behind why you stopped painting, why you left. Thomas's hands trembled as he opened the envelope. Inside were letters from art mentors, critiques, and personal notes revealing how his talent had been stifled by betrayal and sabotage from those he once trusted. The revelation hit Thomas hard. The man who had been labeled just a waiter had been pushed down by forces beyond his control. His dreams weren't just deferred, they were stolen. Yet, within the pain, a new resolve grew. If his past had been marred by betrayal, his future would be built on truth and perseverance. Back home, Laura and Michael's relationship strained under the weight of their own guilt. Laura found herself questioning not just her father, but her own choices. One night, alone in her room, she stared at a faded photograph of her family from years ago, a time when things had been simpler, before bitterness took hold. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "Dad, I'm sorry." Michael, overhearing, clenched his fists but said nothing. The family's fractured foundation was showing signs of both collapse and repair. Thomas's past was no longer a closed chapter. It was a painful, necessary step toward healing. As secrets surfaced, so did the chance for redemption. But the road ahead was steep, filled with old wounds and new challenges. Would forgiveness find a way? Or would the shadows of the past consume them all? The quiet tension between Laura and Michael hung in the air like a storm about to break. Days after the meeting with Jack, Thomas felt a strange mixture of clarity and unrest. His past was no longer a buried secret, but a beacon guiding him forward, and, unexpectedly, pulling his family toward a reckoning they all desperately needed. One chilly afternoon, Thomas received an unexpected visit. Laura stood at his apartment door, hesitation clear in her eyes. She had always been cautious, but today something was different. Vulnerability, perhaps, or a newfound courage. "Dad," she began softly, voice cracking just slightly, "can we talk?" Thomas nodded, stepping aside to let her in. Inside, the modest apartment was filled with sketches, canvases leaning against the walls, silent witnesses to his hidden life. Laura's gaze wandered across the artwork, a mixture of awe and regret crossing her face. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I never really looked." Thomas's heart ached, but he offered a gentle smile. "It's never too late to see," he replied. Their conversation was long overdue. Laura spoke of her regrets, her fears, the years lost in distance and misunderstanding. She confessed how Michael's contempt had shaped her own, how she'd been too proud to reach out. Thomas listened without anger. His own pain had taught him the value of patience and understanding. But the wounds were deep, and healing would not be instant. Meanwhile, Michael, feeling cornered by the changes around him, confronted Thomas at the restaurant where he worked. "Why now?" Michael demanded, voice sharp with suspicion. "Why should we believe you care?" Thomas looked up from the table he was clearing, steady and calm. "Because I never stopped," he said simply. "I fought every day to be more than what you thought I was. And now I want us to be a family again." Michael's face hardened, but beneath the surface, doubt flickered. In the following weeks, the family began tentative steps toward reconciliation. Dinner invitations were extended, conversations started, awkward at first, but sincere. Thomas's art career gained momentum, but more importantly, his family's walls slowly started to crumble. One evening, as Thomas prepared for another gallery showing, Laura joined him in the studio. "This is incredible," she said, tracing a brushstroke with reverence. Thomas smiled. "It's our story, in colors." For the first time in years, hope blossomed between them. But not everyone welcomed the change. Old resentments stirred in Michael, threatening to undo their fragile progress. Yet Thomas remained resolute. He understood that forgiveness was a journey, not a destination. Despite the fragile progress between Thomas, Laura, and Michael, the past refused to stay buried. In the shadowed corners of their lives, secrets stirred, ready to surface and threaten the tentative peace. Michael's resentment simmered beneath his polished exterior. The sting of his father-in-law's newfound success felt like a wound reopening. He couldn't shake the feeling of being overshadowed, humiliated in front of friends and colleagues who once mocked the waiter, but now whispered about the artist. One evening, after a tense family dinner, Michael's frustration boiled over. "How can you expect us to forget years of neglect?" he snapped at Thomas, voice rising. "You weren't there when we needed you. You were absent. Now you come back, painting pictures and expecting forgiveness." Thomas met his gaze evenly. "I never stopped caring. My silence wasn't absence. I was fighting my own battles." But Michael wasn't convinced. At the same time, Laura grappled with her own doubts. She admired her father's courage and talent, but feared the cost of reopening old wounds. In a quiet moment, she confided in her closest friend, Sarah. "I want to believe he's changed," Laura whispered. "But part of me wonders if it's all just a way to make us feel guilty. Can we really trust him?" Sarah's eyes were kind but firm. "Sometimes, the only way to heal is to take a risk." Laura nodded, torn between hope and fear. Meanwhile, Thomas received an anonymous letter slipped under his apartment door. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the message was clear and cutting. "You can't erase the past with paint. Remember who you really are." The note shook Thomas, dredging up old doubts and insecurities. Who could have sent it? A jealous rival? Or someone from his family, unwilling to accept his rise? Determined not to be intimidated, Thomas showed the letter to Laura. "We'll face this together," she promised, gripping his hand. But the pressure mounted. At his next gallery event, Thomas overheard whispers and sideways glances, some admiring, others skeptical. The art world was both welcoming and ruthless. And Michael's subtle attempts to undermine Thomas became harder to ignore. He spread rumors, questioning the authenticity of Thomas's work and his motives. In the midst of this storm, Thomas found solace in his art. Each brushstroke became an act of defiance, a statement that he would not be broken. Laura and Thomas began to share more than just art. They shared memories, fears, and hopes, slowly rebuilding the trust that time had eroded. But Michael's anger festered, threatening to explode. One night, a heated argument erupted between Michael and Laura. Words were exchanged that cut deep, reopening old wounds. Laura stormed out, seeking refuge at Thomas's apartment. There, in the quiet safety of his presence, she finally broke down. "I don't want to lose you again," she sobbed. "But I don't know if Michael will ever accept you." Thomas held her close. "We'll find a way," he whispered. "Together." The fragile thread holding Thomas's renewed family together began to unravel with alarming speed. The walls that had started to crumble were now cracking wide open, exposing raw wounds and festering resentments. After Laura's tearful visit, Thomas resolved to confront Michael directly. The man who had once dismissed him as just a waiter now posed the greatest threat to the fragile peace Thomas had worked so hard to build. At the family's lavish home, tension hung in the air like a storm about to break. Thomas arrived unannounced, his calm demeanor masking a burning determination. Michael met him at the door, face tight with anger. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. "I'm here to talk," Thomas said quietly. "To end this war between us." Michael scoffed. You expect forgiveness just because you won some art prize? That's not how it works. Thomas's eyes burned with quiet intensity. I'm not asking for blind forgiveness. I want honesty. From you, from Laura, from all of us. The truth we've avoided for too long. The confrontation quickly escalated. Michael's words cut deep, accusations flying like arrows. You abandoned us. Left us to fend for ourselves. Do you know how that felt? Thomas's voice shook, but he stood firm. I was broken too. I fought in silence, carrying my own scars. Laura watched from the hallway, tears streaming down her face. The family she had longed to save was tearing itself apart in front of her. Suddenly, Michael's anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of guilt. For a moment, the fierce facade cracked. But then he turned away, retreating into the house, leaving Thomas standing alone on the doorstep. The night that followed was heavy with silence. Thomas returned to his apartment, exhausted but unbroken. He pulled out his sketchbook, his hands moving almost mechanically. On the page, he began to draw the fractured faces of his family. Broken, bruised, yet yearning for connection. Art had become his language when words failed. Meanwhile, Laura struggled to mediate between her father and husband. The distance between them felt like an unbridgeable canyon. She tried calling Michael, but he refused to answer. Alone in her room, she stared at the family portrait hanging on the wall, a reminder of happier times, now tainted by conflict. I just want us to be whole again, she whispered into the darkness. But fate had other plans. The next morning, Michael was involved in a scandal at work. Details of a failed business deal leaked to the press, threatening his career and reputation. In the midst of his personal turmoil, Michael found himself isolated. The very family he scorned was now the only thing that could save him. Thomas, despite everything, stepped forward. He contacted Michael's colleagues, using his newfound influence in the art community to vouch for his integrity and character. It was an unexpected act of kindness, a gesture that surprised everyone, especially Michael. The scandal that engulfed Michael rocked the foundations of his meticulously constructed life. News headlines splashed his name across business journals and social media feeds alike. The failed deal wasn't just a professional disaster, it was a personal humiliation that threatened to unravel everything he had worked so hard to build. Late one evening, Michael sat alone in the dimly lit study of their home. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from colleagues and legal advisors, but his eyes remained fixed on the framed photograph of his father-in-law, Thomas Brooks, proudly holding his art award. The bitter irony was impossible to ignore. The man he had ridiculed, dismissed as just a waiter, was now the only person offering a lifeline. Meanwhile, Thomas received the call. Michael needs help. Laura's voice was steady but tinged with urgency. He's in trouble, Dad. He's reached out to you. Thomas felt a surge of conflicting emotions. The man who had once scorned him now relied on his goodwill. Anger, hurt, and an unexpected compassion warred within him. After a moment's pause, Thomas replied, "Tell him I'll do what I can." The next day, Thomas met with Michael's legal team and business associates. His reputation as an artist and a man of integrity surprised them all. "Mr. Brooks, we didn't expect you to get involved," one of the lawyers admitted. "Your support means a lot." Thomas nodded, a quiet resolve in his eyes. Family is complicated. But loyalty isn't. Back home, Laura watched the strained interaction between the two men, hope flickering in her chest. For the first time in years, a bridge was forming. But healing is never a straight path. Michael's pride made accepting help difficult. He kept his distance, wary of appearing weak. One evening, after a particularly cold exchange, Laura confronted him. "Michael, you have to let go of the past," she pleaded. "Dad isn't your enemy." Michael's eyes flashed with frustration. "He's the reason we're like this. If he hadn't abandoned us, none of this would have happened." Laura shook her head. "Holding on to that won't fix anything. Only forgiveness can." Meanwhile, Thomas continued to create, pouring his emotions into his art. Each new piece told a story of loss, resilience, and hope. His work began to attract attention from major galleries and collectors. Invitations poured in from cities far beyond his hometown. But amidst the growing success, his thoughts never strayed far from his family. One afternoon, Laura found Thomas in his studio, surrounded by canvases bursting with color and life. "I want to help," she said softly. "Help you, help us." Thomas smiled, the warmth of reconciliation glowing in his eyes. "Together, we can rebuild." The days following Thomas's intervention in Michael's crisis were a whirlwind of fragile conversations and uneasy silences. The family's once fractured bonds began to show signs of tentative repair, but old wounds lingered like shadows refusing to fade. At Laura and Michael's home, the air was thick with tension masked by civility. Dinner conversations skirted around heavy topics, favoring safe pleasantries instead. Yet beneath the surface, each word carried unspoken fears and lingering doubts. One evening, Thomas sat quietly in the living room, watching Laura prepare tea. The soft clink of porcelain was a small comfort amidst the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "Laura," he said gently, "this isn't easy for any of us. But every step forward, no matter how small, matters." Laura looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I want us to be a family again, Dad. But sometimes it feels like we're speaking different languages." Thomas nodded. "That's why we have to keep trying. To listen, really listen, not just hear." Meanwhile, Michael wrestled with his pride and pain in solitude. The weight of his downfall pressed heavily on him, but so did the unexpected kindness of Thomas. One afternoon, alone in his study, Michael stared at the invitation to Thomas's next gallery showing. A strange mixture of admiration and jealousy twisted in his chest. He picked up his phone and hesitated, then dialed Thomas's number. "Dad," he said quietly when Thomas answered, maybe we can start over." Thomas smiled, relief washing over him. "I'd like that, Michael." Rebuilding trust was slow and often painful. There were setbacks, harsh words spoken in frustration, moments of withdrawal, and silent dinners. But there were also breakthroughs. Laura began inviting Thomas to family events again, and Michael started to attend Thomas's art shows, albeit reluctantly at first. With each shared experience, the walls between them crumbled just a little more. Outside the family, Thomas's art career blossomed. His work was featured in prominent magazines and galleries. Critics praised his raw emotional depth and unique perspective. Yet, amidst the accolades, Thomas remained grounded. At the heart of his success was the desire to heal not only himself but the family he had nearly lost. One afternoon, Laura accompanied Thomas to a local art workshop he was hosting for young aspiring artists. Watching her father engage passionately with the students, Laura felt a swell of pride and newfound understanding. "He's more than just an artist," she whispered to herself. "He's a healer." But not everyone was ready to embrace change. Some family friends and acquaintances whispered behind closed doors, questioning Thomas's sudden rise and the family's efforts at reconciliation. Their judgment stung, but the family grew stronger together, united by shared pain and hope. The fragile peace that had begun to settle over the Brooks family was suddenly threatened by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. One rainy afternoon, a letter arrived for Thomas, its envelope yellowed and worn, the handwriting unmistakably old. Inside was an invitation to a reunion of his former art school classmates, a reminder of a life he had long tried to leave behind. Memories flooded back, friendships broken, betrayals endured, and a pivotal moment when Thomas was pushed out of the art world he loved. That night, Thomas sat alone in his studio, the invitation resting on the table before him. He hesitated, unsure if he was ready to face the ghosts of his past. The reunion was held in a modest gallery downtown, filled with faces both familiar and foreign. Some greeted Thomas warmly, others avoided his gaze. Among the crowd was Samuel, a former rival who had once sabotaged Thomas's career, helping to shut the door on his dreams. Samuel's smile was thin and unconvincing. Well, Thomas. Never thought I'd see you here, especially after all these years." Thomas met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to relive the past, Samuel. I'm here to move forward." But old wounds ran deep. The whispered conversations and sideways glances reminded Thomas of the battles he had fought long ago. Back home, Laura noticed Thomas's mood darkening. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked gently. Thomas sighed. "The past never really leaves us, Laura. Sometimes it comes back when we least expect it." Laura reached out, squeezing his hand. "Whatever happens, we face it together." As the reunion progressed, Thomas found himself confronting not only Samuel but the doubts and fears that had haunted him for years. He spoke openly about his journey, the pain of rejection, the fight to reclaim his voice, and the love that had sustained him. His honesty touched many, and slowly, some old barriers began to crumble. Yet, the reunion also stirred up unexpected challenges. Samuel, threatened by Thomas's resurgence, began spreading rumors questioning the authenticity of Thomas's art. The whispers reached Laura and Michael, reigniting old tensions. Michael, struggling with his own insecurities, found himself drawn into the conflict. Determined to protect his family and his newfound career, Thomas confronted Samuel one last time. "Your time has passed," Thomas said firmly. "It's not the past that defines me, but what I choose to become." Samuel sneered but said nothing, defeated by Thomas's unwavering resolve. Back home, the family gathered around the dinner table, a united front against the challenges ahead. Laura smiled, hope shining in her eyes. "We're stronger than this. Together." Thomas nodded, the warmth of belonging filling his heart. The storm of old rivalries and whispered doubts seemed to gather strength, but the Brooks family was no longer the fractured unit it once was. They faced the brewing tempest united, bolstered by newfound trust and shared purpose. Days after the reunion, Thomas received an unexpected invitation from a prestigious national art foundation. They wanted to feature his work in a high-profile exhibit celebrating overlooked artists who had fought to reclaim their place in the spotlight. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance not only to solidify his comeback but to confront the shadows that had haunted him for decades. Laura was the first to hear the news. She embraced her father tightly. "This is it, Dad," she whispered. "Your moment." Michael, though more reserved, nodded in approval. The walls between him and Thomas were crumbling faster than he'd anticipated. But old fears lingered in Michael's heart. Could they truly leave the past behind? Could he accept Thomas fully, not just as a successful artist, but as family? As Thomas prepared for the exhibit, the pressure mounted. The media attention, the expectations, and the lingering voices of doubt challenged his confidence. But Thomas found strength in his family's support. Late-night conversations with Laura, shared laughter with Michael, and quiet moments alone in his studio reminded him why he fought so hard. He painted with renewed vigor, each canvas a declaration of resilience. On the opening night of the exhibit, the gallery was alive with energy. Critics, collectors, and art lovers filled the space, eager to witness Thomas's journey through his art. Laura and Michael stood by his side, a silent testament to the family's hard-won reconciliation. As the crowd admired the paintings, Thomas stepped onto the stage to speak. His voice was steady, filled with emotion. "I stand here not just as an artist but as a man who refused to be defined by others' judgments. My journey has been long and difficult, but it is proof that hope and perseverance can overcome even the deepest wounds." The audience erupted in applause. Among the crowd, familiar faces from Thomas's past nodded in respect, rivals subdued by his unwavering spirit. Michael caught Thomas's eye and gave a small, genuine smile. Laura squeezed her father's hand, tears of pride shining in her eyes. After the exhibit, the family gathered quietly, away from the spotlight. Thomas looked at Michael and said, "Thank you for standing by me, despite everything." Michael's voice was low but sincere. "We're family. That means something." Laura smiled. "This is just the beginning." But the journey was far from over. Thomas knew there would be more battles ahead, more scars to heal. Yet, surrounded by love and redemption, he was ready. The success of Thomas's exhibit brought much-needed light into the Brooks family's life, but even the brightest spotlight can cast long shadows. As praise poured in from critics and fans alike, whispers of doubt and envy began to circle, threatening the fragile peace they had painstakingly rebuilt. It started subtly. At the next family gathering, an old friend of Michael's, Greg, made a pointed comment. "So, Thomas is the big artist now, huh?" Greg sneered, swirling his drink. Funny how fast people forget what he really was. Michael's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, while Laura's eyes flashed with anger. "That's enough, Greg," she said firmly. "Thomas has earned every bit of his success." Greg shrugged, smirking. "We'll see how long it lasts." That evening, Michael and Laura discussed the incident in hushed tones. "People will always have something to say," Michael admitted, rubbing his temples. "But it hurts hearing those words aimed at your family." Laura nodded. "We can't let the past define us, Michael. We have to protect what we've rebuilt." Thomas, meanwhile, found himself wrestling with renewed insecurity. The anonymous letters had stopped, but the echoes of judgment lingered in his mind. One night, while working late in his studio, he caught himself hesitating before starting a new piece. The fear of failure crept in, threatening to paralyze his creativity. Laura noticed his struggle and sat beside him. "Dad, you're stronger than those doubts," she said softly. "Remember why you started." Her words ignited a spark within Thomas, reminding him that resilience was born from confronting fear, not avoiding it. As Thomas prepared for a major commission from a renowned gallery, the pressure intensified. The stakes were higher than ever. Michael, observing Thomas's dedication and vulnerability, began to reconsider his own attitude. He approached his father-in-law one afternoon. "I was wrong to hold on to my resentment," Michael said quietly. "I want to support you, truly support you." Thomas smiled, the weight of years beginning to lift. Together, they faced the growing challenges, whispers, doubts, and old wounds that refused to heal overnight. The Brooks family learned that forgiveness was a journey with no clear end, but a series of small, courageous steps. In the quiet moments, Thomas painted not just with his hands, but with his heart, capturing the complex tapestry of pain and hope that defined their lives. The Brooks family stood at a crossroads, a moment where the past threatened to swallow the present, yet the promise of a future beckoned them forward. After years of pain, betrayal, and silence, the time had come for the ultimate test: forgiveness. Thomas's latest project, a monumental mural commissioned for the city's community center, symbolized not just his artistic triumph but his desire to give back, to heal a city and, in turn, himself. The mural depicted scenes of struggle, resilience, and unity, reflecting the very journey he and his family had endured. As the mural took shape under his skilled hands, Thomas invited Laura and Michael to join him for the unveiling. Their participation would signify the family's commitment to moving forward together. Days before the unveiling, Michael wrestled with his emotions. Pride battled guilt, hope clashed with fear. He remembered the years of resentment, the bitterness that had clouded his heart. One evening, he found himself standing before a mirror, searching for the man he wanted to become. The reflection staring back was tired but determined. He called Laura, voice steady yet vulnerable. "I want to be there, with you and Dad. Not as a skeptic or critic, but as family." Laura smiled, relief washing over her. "We've been waiting for you." The day of the unveiling arrived, bright and clear. A crowd gathered, city officials, friends, neighbors, all eager to witness the new symbol of hope. Thomas, Laura, and Michael stood side by side as the curtain dropped, revealing the vibrant mural. Gasps and applause filled the air. The mural's powerful imagery spoke volumes: a father's struggle, a daughter's forgiveness, a son's redemption woven into one canvas. As cameras flashed and voices praised the artwork, Thomas addressed the crowd. "This mural is more than paint on a wall. It's a testament to the power of forgiveness and the strength found in family." He glanced at Laura and Michael, their faces reflecting pride and hope. This is our story, and it is far from over. In the days that followed, the Brooks family began to rebuild their lives with renewed purpose. Michael took steps to repair his professional reputation, supported by Thomas's growing network of allies. Laura became an advocate for community arts programs, inspired by her father's journey. And Thomas continued to create, each piece a step toward healing, each brushstroke a declaration of love. The past had tested them, but it could no longer define them. Together, they embraced the future, flawed, uncertain, but filled with possibility. The mural's unveiling marked not only a public celebration but a deeply personal milestone for the Brooks family. The years of pain, silence, and misunderstanding had culminated in this moment of unity, forgiveness, and hope. Yet, for Thomas, the journey was about more than just reconciliation. It was about legacy. In the weeks following the event, Thomas found himself reflecting on the path he had traveled. From a dismissed waiter to a recognized artist, his life had been a testament to resilience. But now, with his family slowly mending, he realized the true measure of success lay not in fame or accolades, but in the connections he nurtured. One afternoon, Thomas sat in his studio surrounded by new canvases, each telling a story of struggle and triumph. Laura entered quietly, carrying a small box filled with old photographs and letters, artifacts from their shared history. "Dad," she said softly, "I found these in the attic. Memories we thought were lost." Together, they sifted through the treasures, faded pictures of a younger Thomas with paint-stained hands, letters from art teachers who had believed in him, and notes from Laura and Michael's childhood filled with hope and laughter. "These remind me," Thomas said, eyes glistening, "that no matter how far we fall, there's always a way back." Michael, having rebuilt his career with Thomas's support, invited his father-in-law to a business gala. It was a gesture of respect and acknowledgement, a sign that the walls of resentment were finally crumbling. During the event, Michael introduced Thomas to influential patrons and collectors, proudly speaking of the man he once doubted. "I was wrong," Michael admitted later that night. "Not just about your talent, but about you." Thomas smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. "We all have our journeys. What matters is the courage to change." The Brooks family began hosting regular gatherings, inviting friends and neighbors to celebrate art, community, and connection. These events became a living testament to their transformed relationships. Laura spearheaded a program to teach art to underserved youth, inspired by her father's journey from obscurity to recognition. Thomas, humbled by the impact, often spoke at these gatherings about the power of forgiveness and the importance of never giving up on those you love. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Thomas stood before the mural, a vibrant tapestry of their story. He thought about the man he had been and the man he had become. And he knew, without doubt, that the greatest masterpiece was not the art on the walls, but the love that had survived the hardest trials. Thank you for spending this time with us. If the story moved you, even a little, let us know. Drop a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe for more stories that stay with you long after the screen fades. Your support means more than you know.